Time, Love, Memory. The story of Seymour Benzer. The story of Seymour Benzer truly begins with Thomas Hunt Morgan, who discovered crossing over in chromosomes. He used this phenomenon to further his idea of genes as a physical unit. The true inspiration, however, for Seymour Benzer's later work was Alfred Sturtevant, a student of Thomas Hunt Morgan. Sturtevant provided the evidence that Thomas Hunt Morgan needed to put forth his idea of genes as a physical unit. Sturtevant noticed that in fruit flies, certain traits occur together quite often. He then did some simple math and came up with a map. The map placed genes on a line separated by map units. The less often two traits occurred together, the closer they must be, preventing crossing over. Seymour Benzer would later use the same type of map in his work with bacteriophage and fruit flies. He used it to show where behaviors occurred on the chromosomes and related them to physical traits such as white eyes or red eyes. Born October 15, 1921 in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn to Polish immigrants, Seymour Benzer was favored as the only son. He began his scientific career early by dissecting frogs. He then received a microscope on his 13th birthday as a bar mitzvah present in 1934. Coincidentally, this was the same year that Thomas Hunt Morgan received the Nobel Prize for his theory of the gene. Seymour Benzer studied anything he could under the microscope, including blood and sweat. He then began reading a book called Aerosmith, which had strong influences on his scientific career. He even imitated the spidery writing of Max Gottlieb, the main character. He graduated high school at 15 and then attended Brooklyn College on a Regents scholarship. There he met the love of his life, a 21-year-old named Dottie. It was around this time that Hermann Muller, a former student of Morgan's, discovered that X-rays induced a large number of mutations in the chromosomes of fruit flies. In Germany, Max Delbruck, then an atomic physicist, heard about Muller's experiments. He found that this was more fascinating than physics and decided to join Morgan. A physicist at heart, Max Delbruck found the papers on fruit flies to be too complex and decided to move to bacteriophage research because it seemed easier and cleaner than fly research. In 1942, Seymour married the love of his life, Dottie, and the two moved to Indiana. Seymour attended Purdue University as a graduate student in physics. Benzer was recruited into a secret military program designed to build a better radar. His research could have made him a very rich man, but during his time there, he was introduced to a book by Erwin Schrödinger called What is Life? In it, Schrödinger wondered whether physics and biology were connected. He called his model the Delbruck model. Benzer was intrigued by Delbruck and wanted to meet him. He had the same fascination that he had had for Max Gottlieb, the hero of the Aerosmith book. At a dinner, a mutual acquaintance offered to introduce the two. Under Max Delbruck's guidance, Seymour Benzer soon began research on the R2 gene in bacteriophage. Seymour Benzer had the idea that sometimes genes can break in the middle. He wanted to test this by crossing two defective R strains of the bacteriophage. Benzer hoped that by doing this, the two defective R strains of the bacteriophage would combine their genes and form one healthy copy. When Benzer got his manuscript back from Delbruck, all that Delbruck had commented was, "You must have drunk a triple highball before writing this. This is going to be offensive to a lot of people that I respect." Needless to say, Delbruck was not a fan of Benzer's idea. Benzer's work took off, despite Max Delbruck's concerns. Seymour Benzer, in a few years, had mapped out what some called a Torah scroll. On it, he had shown the locations of thousands of mutations in the R2 gene of bacteriophage. This was a first in biology. He also was one of the first to discover mutations such as deletions and inversions. Benzer let his curiosity drive his work, and it eventually led him to Pasadena, California, where he began research on Drosophila, or fruit flies. Benzer quickly found that behavior interested him most. He found that there were some fruit flies who had no sense of time, a fast clock, or a slow clock. Benzer and his graduate students also found flies that were unable to do the mating dance needed to secure a mate. They also found male fruit flies that seemed to dance with other males and ignore females altogether. Another important discovery that Seymour Benzer and his graduate students made was that there were some flies who had poor short-term memory, some flies that had poor long-term memory, and some flies that had no memory at all. The most important part of all of this was that Benzer and his graduate students showed a connection between behavior and genes. That is, behavior is inherited on the gene and is not necessarily learned. One of the biggest critics of Seymour Benzer's work was Jeff Hall. Hall argued that Seymour Benzer was researching things that didn't matter. There was no way that these things would apply to humans. On the contrary, Benzer showed that often there are humans who display similar behaviors and, in fact, similar genes to fruit flies. Hall, to this day, still does not believe that what Benzer did was worthwhile. Benzer died in 2007 of a stroke, but his work goes on. One of his final discoveries was a fly that he named Methuselah that could live for 100 days. Hopefully, his research will be able to shed some light on human behavior as he hoped.